All right, this is Engage New York, Module 1, Lesson 7, Concept Development. So for the first part, we're going to actually cross out this 200 because we're just going to do the top two. So we're going to be finding number sense. We're going to be finding out where does this number live on the number line? Where is its place in comparison to all the other numbers? All right, we're going to look at 160, okay? So they want us to find the 100, how to round to the hundredth, and how to run to the tens place. So we're going to use these vertical number lines down here, and we're going to focus on finding the midpoint and using the midpoint to round up or down, okay, to the nearest hundreds place or the nearest tens place. So I'm going to start with 160, okay? And we're going to round to the hundred spot, okay? So if we're starting off a number line, I'm going to start with 0, okay? And then I'm going to label it 100. Since we're doing the hundred spot, I'm going to be counting the number line by hundreds. 200, and we'll go to 300, okay? So the first thing I need to look at is, where does 160 live on the number line? Does it live between 0 and 100, 100 and 200, or 200 and 300? It's going to be placed in between these two. In between 100 and 200, right? 160 is in between those. Okay? So the second question we're going to do is, what's the midpoint? We're going to find the midpoint between 100 and 200. Does everyone know the midpoint between 100 and 200? Yeah, it's 150. All right. So the third step is we need to figure out where 160 fits in. Does it fit in between 100 and 150? Or does it fit in between 150 and 200? All right. I know this is a little tricky, but we're just going to keep doing it step by step, and you guys will start to understand it, okay? So 160, it fits in between 150 and 200, okay? So I'm going to label it right here, 160. So since 160 is above the midpoint, are we going to round up to 200, or are we going to round down to 100 if we're trying to round the 100 spot? The nearest 100 is equal to 200. So if I'm rounding 160 to the nearest 100 spot, it will be 200. Does anyone have any questions? Or should I just do another example to explain a little bit more? All right, so next we're going to be rounding 160 to the 10 spot. So this is the 10 spot, okay? So I'm going to start the number line. Let's say we'll start the number line at 150. Then we'll go up to 160 to 170 to 180. All right? So if I'm trying to find where 160 lives on this, does it live between 170 and 180? No. Between 160 and 170? Yeah, it's the beginning of that, right? 160 is the bottom number of the number line area right here, right? So 160 will be placed right in here. So now let's find the midpoint. Let's find the midpoint of 160 and 170. Who knows what the midpoint is? Perfect. It's 165. So now I'm going to find where 160 fits in. Does it fit in between 165 and 170? Or does it fit in between 160 and 165? I think it fits in between 160 and 165, right? Because it's right on that. It's right on 160. So since it is below 165, we aren't going to be rounding up, right? We're staying at 160. So the nearest tenth is 160. Does everyone see how I did that? All right, so let's practice on 155. Let's start with the 100 spot. Let's round to the 100 spot. I'll start my number line at 0, move up to 100, 200, and then 300. All right. So who knows where 155 lives on this? Is it between 0 and 100, 100 and 200, or 200 and 300? It is between 155, or 155 lives between 100 and 200, right? So let's find. All right. Let's find the midpoint. What's the midpoint between 100 and 200? 150, right? So now, where does 155 fit in? Does it fit between 100 and 150, or does it fit between 150 and 200? Fits between 150 and 200, right? So this is 155. We're just going to label it right in there, right? All right. So since it's above the midpoint, since 155 is greater than the midpoint, we round up. We round to the next nearest 100. What's the next nearest 100? It's 200, right? All right. Now we're going to draw one more number line, okay? And we're going to do 155 to the nearest 10. So I'm going to start with, let's start down here with 150, or actually, I'm sorry, 140. Then we'll go up to 150, 160, and then 170, right? So can you all tell me where 155 lives between? Does it live between 140? Does it live in 150? Or does it live between 150 and 160? Or is it in between 160 and 170? It's right in here, right? It lives between 150 and 160. So now, since we know what area it's in, let's find the midpoint. The midpoint is 155. Good job, guys. Hang in there. It'll get easier as we go, okay? So if I'm looking at 155, where does it fit between? Does it fit between 150 and 155? Or 155 and 160? We're going to say it fits up top, right? Because when we get to the midpoint, if it equals the midpoint, right, that means we round up. So 155 is the midpoint, and it's also your number. So since 155 is at the midpoint, we round up to 160. We round up to 160. Okay, so problem 2. Decompose 1.57 to the nearest tenth. All right, so where's the 10 spot? Right here is the 10 spot. So that's where we're going to be rounding to, okay? So on our number line, let's start with 1.40. We'll move up to 1.50. Next spot, 1.60 and 1.70. Okay? So the first step, we want to go to the tenths. The first step that we're going to do is we're going to, where does 1.57 live? Question mark. Where does 1.7 live? Well, does it live between 1.40 and 1.5? 1.50 and 1.60? Or 1.60 and 1.70? So live here. We get a thumbs up if we've got that. Awesome. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to point this down. So first step's down. Now step 2. Let's find the midpoint. All right. What's the midpoint between 1.50 and 1.60? Good job. 1.55. All right. Now on to step 3. Where does 1.7 fit in? Where does 1.7 fit in? Does it fit in between 1.50 and 1.55? Or does it fit in between 1.55 and 1.60? Right? I saw some head nodding. So I'll put that. I'm going to label it right here. 1.57. All right. So now the last and final step, we're going to write this down. Since 1.57 is above the midpoint, it rounds up. So the nearest tenth equals 1.60. All right, so problem 3, we're going to decompose 4.381 to tens, the tens, 1, tenth, and hundredth spot. So the first one we're going to look at is the 10 spot. I'm going to start my number line down here at 0, go up to 10 and 20. So the first question I ask myself, where does 4.381 live? Lives between 0 and 10, right? So I drew my little line down here to remind myself. All right, so now I'm going to find the midpoint, number 2. The midpoint between 0 and 10 is 5. Okay, so now we move to number 3. Where does 4.381 fit in? Does it fit between 0 and 5, or does it fit between 5 and 10? It fits between 0 and 5. Okay, so since 4.381 is below the midpoint, we round down. So the nearest 10 is 0. Okay, I'm going to move on to the 1 spot. So I'm going to start my number line here at 3. So I have 3, 4, 5, and 6. Where does 4.381 live? between 4 and 5, okay? If I find the midpoint between 4 and 5 is 4.5. Where does 4.381 fit in? Does it fit between 4 and 4.5 or 4.5 and 5? It fits between 4 and 4.5. So I'm going to label it right there. So since 4.381 is below the midpoint, we round down. So the nearest one is 4. How's it looking for everyone? Can I get a thumbs up if we're doing okay? If it's making sense now that we have all the steps written down? Perfect. We're going to move on to the next part of the question real quick. All right. So 4.381 still, we're going to be rounding to the 10th spot. The 10th spot. So I'm going to start my number line, including tenths, right? So I have 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5. We need to make sure we're creating the number line that, fits a good area for the number we're doing. So when I look at the 10th spot here, I'm like, okay, so close to that is 2, close to that is 4, close to that is 5. So I'm going to start with 4.2 and go all the way up to 4.5 just so I have a little bit of a range for the 10th spot, okay? So where does 4.385 live on here? It lives between 4.3 and 4.4. So next, I need to find the midpoint. I need to find the midpoint between 4.3 and 4.4, which is labeled in blue right here. 4.35 is the midpoint. So number 3, where does 4.381 fit in? Does it fit between 4.3 and 4.35 or 4.35 and 4.4? Fits between 4.35 and 4.4. So since 4.381 is above the midpoint, we round up. So the nearest 10th is 4.4. Right here, 4.4. All right, we're going to do this last one real quick, and then we got to go for the day, okay? So we're rounding to the 100th. So we're going to need 100 spots on here, right? So all the numbers vary just by the 100th spot. All right, so I'm going to start, since it's an 8, so I'm going to start down here at 4.37, then 4.38, 4.39, and 4.40, okay? So I know, Ivan, give me 30 seconds and I'll finish this. I know it's 2:20. Okay, so where does this live? It lives between 4.38 and 4.39. Okay, so now let's find the midpoint. 4.385 is the midpoint. Where does 4.381 live between, or fit in between? The 4.38 and the 4.385, or the 4.385 and the 4.39? Fits down here, right? So since 4.381 is below the midpoint, we round down. And the nearest 100th is 4.38. Okay? So for homework tonight, I want you guys to finish this last problem. Try to work on problem 4, but we will be posting it because I'll finish. All right, so problem 4. So problem 4, we're going to decompose 9.975 to the 1, the 10, the 10th, and the 100 spot. Okay, so first off, we're going to start with 10. I'm going to start my number line here at 0 and do 10 and 20. All right, so where does 9.975 live? It lives between 0 and 10. Okay, so next, number 2, we're going to find the midpoint. The midpoint between 0 and 10 is 5, written here in blue, okay? So now, where does 9.975 fit in? Where does it fit in? Does it fit in between 0 and 5 or 5 and 10? Fits between 5 and 10. So since 9.975 is above the midpoint, we round up. So the nearest 10 is 10. All right. So here we'll go. We're going to round to the 1 spot. This is the 1 spot, right? So we're going to start here. Start a number line. 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay? So, oh, I'm sorry. That is not the 1 spot. This is the 1 spot. Okay. So, where does 9.975 live? It lives between 9 and 10, right? 9.975 is between 9 and 10. Everyone agree with that one? All right. So if I'm finding the midpoint, what's the midpoint between 9 and 10? It's 9.5. Okay? So the next part, where does 9.975 fit in? Does it fit in between 9 and 9.5? Or does it fit in between 9.5 and 10? It fits in between 9.5 and 10, 9.975. Okay, so since 9.975 is above the midpoint, we round up. So the nearest one is 10. All right, we round up. All right, so now we'll look at the 10th spot. So I'm going to start my number line here at 9.8 because this is the 10th spot right here, right? So I'll start 9.8, 9.9, 10.0, and 10.1. Where does 9.975 live? It lives down here between 9.9 and 10.0. To find the midpoint, can you find the midpoint between 9.9 and 10.0 for me? Good, it's 9.95. So where does 9.975 fit in now? Does it fit between 9.9 and 9.95? Or does it fit between 9.95 and 10.0? All right, perfect. Between 9.95 and 10.0. So since 9.975 is above the midpoint, we round up. The nearest 10th is 10.0. All right, last problem. We're going to be rounding to the 100th spot. So this 7 right here is the 100th spot. I started my number line down here at 9.96. I did 9.97, 9.98, and 9.99. So where does 9.975 live? All the way down here between 9.97 and 9.98, right? So let's find the midpoint between 9.97 and 9.98. All right, it's written here in blue for you, 9.975. So where does 9.975 fit in? Oh, it fits right on top of the midpoint, right? So since 9.975 is at the midpoint, we round up. So the nearest 100th is 9.98.